You gonna pay for that, Morales? Peterson's voice dripped like cheap syrup. Not a question, more like a threat. Outside, the rain hammered the golden spoon. Inside, Jenna gripped the worn leather wallet in her apron pocket. $5 grand. Enough to save Noah. Enough to finally breathe. But the old guy, quiet, kind eyes. Now Peterson was on her, cameras rolling. He thought she was a thief. He's already decided. But Jenna knew something he didn't. The faded photo inside, the woman smiling, a bench. That picture? It was worth more than all the money in the world. More than her job. They think they've caught a crook. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. Ed of theft and fired on the spot. Her life is shattered. But the story doesn't end there, because just a few hours later, the quiet, unassuming man who lost that wallet comes back to the diner. And he isn't just any customer. He's Arthur Pendleton, the reclusive billionaire who owns the entire restaurant chain, and he wants to know why his wallet was found in the hands of a supposed thief. The smell of stale coffee and sizzling bacon grease was the perfume of Jenna Morales' life. It clung to her clothes, her hair, and her weary spirit. At 6:02 a.m., the lights of the Golden Spoon Diner flickered on, casting a jaundiced glow over the worn red vinyl booths and the checkered linoleum floor. For Jenna, it was another Tuesday, which meant another 14-hour shift on her feet, another day of juggling coffee pots and placating impatient customers, all for a wage that barely kept the lights on in her cramped second-floor apartment. The real weight, however, wasn't the job itself. It was Noah. Her 7-year-old son was the sun in her universe, a bright, curious boy with a laugh that could melt glaciers. But that laugh was too often cut short by a ragged, desperate camp for air. Noah's asthma was severe, a constant lurking monster that prescription medication and regular nebulizer treatments kept at bay. But keeping it at bay was expensive. The co-pays, the emergency inhalers, the specialist visits. They were a financial tidal wave that was slowly pulling Jenna under. An eviction notice was tucked under a magnet on her fridge, a stark white rectangle of shame she tried not to look at. Morales, you're on opening duty. Table 7's coffee is already cold, and they just sat down. Try to keep up today, will you? The voice belonged to Dennis Peterson, the diner's manager. He was a man whose ambition had long outstripped his talent, leaving him bitter and obsessed with the small thief he ruled. He lived by the corporate manual, a 3-in-binder he treated like scripture. Policy was his shield, and he used it to bludgeon any hint of individuality or common sense out of his staff. Yes, Mr. Peterson, Jenner said, her voice a practiced monotone. She grabbed a fresh pot of coffee, her movements efficient and automatic. Years of this work had turned her body into a machine. Poor smile. Take the order. Repeat. The morning rush was a blur of faces and orders. Scrambled over easy bacon, crisp bacon limp. Jenna moved through it all with a detached grace. Her mind is at miles away, calculating. The pharmacy bill is $187. The rent is 2 weeks late. Noah needs new shoes. The numbers swirled in her head, a dizzying ballet of debt and despair. Her only ally in this place was Brenda, a heavy-set woman in her late 50s with a cynical sense of humor and a heart of gold. During a brief lull, Brenda leaned against the counter next to Jenna, refilling salt shakers. He's on a tear today, Brenda muttered, nodding towards Peterson's office. Got an email from corporate about optimizing profit margins. For him, that means counting how many napkins we give out. Jenna forced a weak smile. Tell me something I don't know. You look tired, honey. Is Noah okay? Same as always, had a rough night. The humidifier helps, but Jenna's voice trailed off. She didn't need to finish. Brenda understood every parent's worst fear is not being able to provide, not being able to protect their child. For Jenna, that fear was a constant physical ache in her chest. It was around 11:30 a.m., just as the lunch crowd began to trickle in, that it happened. A man had been sitting alone in booth 12, a quiet, elderly gentleman in a simple tweed jacket. He hadn't been demanding. He'd ordered a black coffee and a bowl of oatmeal, read a newspaper, and left a generous tip. Jenner had barely registered him beyond his polite smile. As she cleared his table, wiping away the crumbs and collecting the dishes. Her hand brushed against something thick and solid, wedged between the seat cushion and the booze wall. She pulled it out. It was a men's wallet. It wasn't flashy, made of dark, well-worn leather, but it felt heavy, substantial. Her heart gave a little flutter. Company policy, as drilled into them by Peterson Daly, was crystal clear. All lost property, regardless of perceived value, must be surrendered to the on-duty manager immediately for logging and storage in the company safe. No exceptions. Jenner glanced towards the manager's office. Peterson was on the phone gesticulating wildly, his face red. He was probably arguing with a supplier about the price of ketchup packets. Turning it in now meant a lecture. It meant filling out a form in triplicate. It meant listening to Peterson pontificate about chain of custody and employee responsibility. I'll just wait until he's off the phone, she thought. It'll be quicker, less fuss. She slipped the wallet into the deep front pocket of her apron, the heavy leather of foreign object against her thigh. She had every intention of turning it in. In 5 minutes, 10 at the most, she would walk over to his office and place it on his desk. It was the right thing to do. It was the only thing to do. But in that moment, as she turned to greet a new family sliding into a booth, she had no idea that this simple, honest intention was about to cost her everything. The weight of the wallet in her apron pocket was a constant reminder. Through 3 more lunch orders and a half-dozen coffee refills, it felt like a lead weight pulling at the fabric, pulling at her conscience. Every time she brushed against a table, the solid rectangular shape pressed against her leg. Mr. Peterson was still on his phone call, his voice now a low, angry rumble that vibrated through his office door. Finally, a momentary calm descended upon the diner. Most tables were served, and the kitchen clatter subsided to a simmer. Jenna ducked into the narrow, dimly lit employee break room, a closetized space that smelled of instant soup and disinfectant. She needed a moment. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic rhythm of anxiety. Why? She hadn't done anything wrong. She was just holding on to it until the manager was free. Still, she had to see. Curiosity, a dangerous and powerful force nared at her. What if there was an ID inside? She could see the man's name, maybe even find a phone number. If she could call him directly, she could save everyone the trouble of Peterson's bureaucratic nightmare. The man could come back, get his wallet, and be on his way. A simple human solution. With trembling fingers, she pulled the wallet from her pocket. The leather was soft, worn, smooth with years of use. It opened with a gentle sigh. The first thing she saw was the cash. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a few 20s. It was a thick, neat stack of $100 bills. She quickly, discreetly fanned the edge of the stack with her thumb. 10, 20, 30. She stopped counting somewhere around 50. $5,000, maybe more. $5,000. The number echoed in the sudden silence of her mind, drowning out the distant clang of pots and pans. It wasn't just money. It was a solution. It was the past due rent paid in full. It was the looming medical collection agency silenced. It was a new, more effective nebulizer for Noah. It was a month, maybe 2, without the crushing, suffocating weight of poverty pressing down on her. It was a chance to breathe. Her mind raced, painting a vivid, seductive picture. Who would know the man was old, unassuming? He might not even remember how much cash he had. He might not even remember this diner. He could be a tourist already on a plane to another state. She could just take it. She could walk out at the end of her shift, pay her bills, and no one would be the wiser. She saw Noah's face, his small chest heaving during a nighttime asthma attack, and her resolve wavered. Wasn't her son's health more important than the pocket money of some wealthy stranger? Her gaze fell from the cash to the other side of the wallet. Tucked behind a flap of leather, she saw the edge of a photograph. She carefully slid it out. It was old and faded, the corners soft with wear. It showed a young woman with a radiant smile, her hair styled in a way that suggested the photo was decades old. She was sitting on a park bench, and the man standing behind her, his hands on her shoulders, was a much younger version of the quiet gentleman from booth 12. They looked happy, deeply in love. There was an inscription on the back in delicate looping cursive, Arthur and Genevieve, 1978. Our bench. Something inside Jenna shifted. The cash was impersonal. It was paper. But this photo, this was a life. This was a memory, a piece of someone's soul they carried with them every day. This wallet didn't just contain money. It contained a man's history. It contained his love for the smiling woman in the photograph. To take the money would be to steal more than just cash. It would be a violation of that memory, a desecration of something sacred. She couldn't do it. The thought, which had seemed so logical and desperate just moments before now, felt monstrous. Her own struggles were real, but they didn't give her the right to inflict a different kind of pain on someone else. Her decision solidified. She started looking for an ID. She needed to find his name. She sifted through the slots past a few credit cards. Arthur Pendleton. The name was printed in simple block letters on a platinum card. There was no address, no phone number, just the name, Arthur Pendleton. She tucked the photo carefully back into its slot, closed the wallet, and took a deep, steadying breath. The temptation had passed, leaving behind a clean, clear sense of purpose. She would do the right thing. She would march into Peterson's office, slap the wallet on his desk, and endure whatever lecture he deemed necessary. She pushed open the break room door and stepped back into the diner. Mr. Peterson was finally off the phone, standing by the register, with his arms crossed, scowling at the cash drawer. This was her chance, Mr. Peterson. She began walking towards him, her hand reaching into her apron. But before she could pull the wallet out, before she could explain, he turned to face her, and his eyes were not just angry. They were cold with triumph. Morales. My office now. The short walk to Mr. Peterson's office felt like a mile on broken glass. Every eye in the diner seemed to be on her. Brenda shot her a worried look from behind the coffee machine. The cook peered out from the kitchen window, his spatula frozen midair. Jenna's stomach twisted into a tight, cold knot. This wasn't the look of a manager about to log a lost item. This was the look of a predator who had cornered his prey. The office was as charmless as the man himself. A cheap metal desk was littered with schedules and invoices. The only personal touch was a framed manager of the month certificate from 3 years ago. A small black and white monitor sat on the corner of the desk, displaying a grainy four-way split of the diner's security cameras. Peterson didn't invite her to sit. He walked behind his desk and pointed a thick, accusatory finger at the screen. I saw you, Morales. Jenner's brow furrowed. Saw me? What? Sir, don't play dumb with me. It's insulting. He sneered. He tapped the screen, rewinding the footage. He pointed to a timestamp, 11:34 a.m. It showed her clearing booth 12, finding the wallet and slipping it into her apron. Then he fast-forwarded. 11:35, 11:40, 11:45. The footage showed her serving other tables, pouring coffee, even smiling at a customer's child, all with the wallet still in her pocket. Finally, it showed her entering the break room. 22 minutes, Peterson said, his voice dripping with venom. For 22 minutes, you had that wallet in your possession. You served 3 tables. You refilled 6 drinks. You made no attempt to surrender the item to management as per Section 4, subsection B of the Employee Code of Conduct. Jenner's head was spinning. Mr. Peterson, I was waiting for you to get off the phone. I was going to give it to you as soon as you were free. I just went into the break room to find an ID. She pulled the wallet from her apron and placed it on the desk between them. See, it's right here. Nothing is missing. I was just trying to find the owner's name. Peterson didn't even glance at the wallet. His eyes were fixed on her, alight with a cruel glee. You were trying to find an eye, or were you in there counting the cash, deciding if it was worth losing your job over? The accusation hit her like a physical blow. What? No, I would never. Oh, I think you would. He cut her off. I know your type. Always complaining about hours, always needing an advance. I see the desperation. You thought you hit the jackpot. A little bonus for yourself. You slip into the break room, the one place without a direct camera angle to see what your prize is. The only reason you didn't walk out with it is because you knew you wouldn't get past me at the end of your shift. Every word was a twisting knife. He was painting a picture of her as a common thief, a degenerate, and he was doing it with such relish. All her hard work, all the double shifts, The swallowing of her pride day after day, it all meant nothing. In his eyes, her poverty was proof of her guilt. That's not true. Jenna's voice shook with a mixture of fear and fury. I saw a photo inside a picture of the man and his wife. That's why I decided to look for his name. I wanted to return it to him. His name is Arthur Pendleton. Peterson actually laughed. A short barking sound, a likely story. You're just making that up now to save your own skin. You violated company policy. You concealed lost property on your person for 22 minutes. That constitutes intent to steal. We have a zero-tolerance policy for that, Morales. Zero tolerance. He was enjoying this. He was making an example of her. He probably saw a commendation from corporate in his future, and at boy for his vigilance. Please, Mr. Peterson. She begged, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. I need this job. My son, he's sick. That's not my problem, he said, his face hardening into a mask of indifference. Maybe you should have thought about your sick son before you decided to become a thief. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low theatrical growl. You are terminated, effective immediately. Get your personal belongings from your locker and get out. I want you off the premises in 5 minutes. Humiliation washed over Jenna in a hot, sickening wave. He wasn't just firing her. He was branding her. He was doing it in the middle of the lunch rush. She stumbled out of his office, her vision blurred with unshed tears. Peterson followed her. He stood by the main counter, arms crossed, watching her every move to ensure she didn't try to pocket the silverware on her way out. Brenda rushed over her face, a canvas of concern. Jenner, what happened? He fired me. Jenner whispered, her voice cracking. He said, I tried to steal a wallet I found. A collective gasp went through the nearby staff. Customers at the counter turned to stare. Peterson's voice boomed across the diner. Let this be a lesson to everyone. Starlight Hospitality Group does not tolerate theft. We have procedures for a reason. This is what happens when you think you are above the rules. Jenna felt 100 pairs of eyes on her burning into her skin. She was no longer a person. She was a spectacle, a cautionary tale. Cheeks flaming, she grabbed her worn-out purse and threadbare jacket from the locker, not even looking at Brenda, unable to bear the pity in her friend's eyes. She pushed through the diner's glass doors and out into the harsh afternoon light, the little bell above the door chiming her pathetic exit. The sounds of the diner faded behind her, replaced by the roar of traffic and the frantic beating of her own heart. She had walked in that morning worried about bills. She was walking out now with no job, no final paycheck, and the stain of a false accusation clinging to her like the smell of bacon grease. She had nothing. And as she began the long, numb walk home, one question screamed in her mind. What am I going to tell Noah? The walk home was a journey through a fog of disbelief. The city bustled around her cars, honking people laughing on their lunch breaks, the scent of street food from a vendor's cart. But Jenna was insulated from it all by a thick blanket of shock. Her feet moved one in front of the other out of sheer habit, carrying her towards the one place she felt safe, a place that was now under imminent threat. Her apartment building was a tired 3-story brick structure with peeling paint and windows that rattled when the wind blew. The climb up the 2 flights of stairs felt like ascending a mountain. Each step seemed to amplify the words echoing in her head. Terminated, thief, zero tolerance. She unlocked her door and stepped inside. The silence was the first thing that hit her. Usually after school, the small apartment would be filled with the sound of cartoons or Noah humming as he drew at the small kitchen table. But today it was utterly still. A note on the table in the neat rounded handwriting of her neighbor, Mrs. Gable, explained why Jenna Noah had a bit of a coughing spell after school. Didn't seem too bad, but I thought it best to take him over to my place and get him on his nebulizer. He's calm now and watching a movie. Come get him when you're back. Don't worry, Susan. A fresh wave of nausea and gratitude washed over Jenna. Gratitude for her kind elderly neighbor and nausea at the reality of the situation. Another asthma attack. Another reminder of the fragile thread from which her son's health and her own sanity hung. And now she had lost the single most important tool she had to protect him, her income, and with it her health insurance. She sank onto the lumpy sofa, the springs groaning in protest. The eviction notice on the fridge seemed to mock her, its bold red letters glowing with malice. She stared at the worn spot on the carpet where Noah usually played with his toy cars at the crayon drawing of a smiling sun he had taped to the wall. This was her world, this tiny, struggling, love-filled world. And Mr. Peterson had just set a match to it. For a long time, she just sat there hollowed out. The anger and humiliation from the diner had cooled into a solid, heavy lump of despair in her gut. How could this have happened? She had spent her entire life trying to be a good person. She worked hard, paid her taxes, was polite to everyone, and raised her son to be kind and honest. And her one reward for a moment of integrity was public disgrace and financial ruin. The irony was so cruel it was almost laughable. After an hour of sitting in the deafening silence, she knew she couldn't postpone the inevitable. She had to face her son. She walked over to Mrs. Gable's apartment and knocked softly. Noah flew into her arms the moment the door opened. "Mommy, I saw the new Astrobot movie. It was so cool. Can we get it?" Jenna hugged him tight, burying her face in his soft, clean-smelling hair, trying to absorb his innocent joy. "Maybe soon, sweetie. Maybe soon." Mrs. Gable gave her a knowing, sympathetic look. He was a trooper, just a little wheezy. "He's fine now." Back in their own apartment, Jenna tried to act normal. She helped Noah with his homework, listened to him chatter on about Astrobot's laser cannons, and made them macaroni and cheese for dinner. But a dark cloud hung over her, and Noah, perceptive as always, picked up on it. "Are you sad, Mommy?" he asked, pushing a noodle around his plate. Jenna's carefully constructed dam of composure finally broke. A single tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. "Yeah, sweetie. Mommy's a little sad." She couldn't bring herself to tell him the whole truth, to see the fear in his eyes. "My job, it's finished. I won't be working at the diner anymore." Noah's face fell. "Why don't you like making pancakes?" "It's complicated," she said, forcing a watery smile. "But don't you worry. It's a good thing. It means I'll have more time to find a much better job, and I'll get to spend more time with you." It was a lie, and it tasted like ash in her mouth. The truth was, she would be spending every waking moment desperately scouring online job boards, pounding the pavement, facing rejection after rejection in a city that had little to offer a waitress without a high school diploma. Later that night, long after Noah had fallen asleep, Jenna sat at the kitchen table, the glow of her old laptop illuminating her face. The screen was filled with job listings: telemarketer, warehouse stalker, overnight cleaner. Each one required experience she didn't have, or offered hours that were impossible for a single mother. The silence of the apartment pressed in on her. It was a silence filled with the hum of the refrigerator, the distant wail of a siren, and the terrifying sound of her own dwindling options. She thought back to the wallet, the $5,000, the easy way out she had rejected for a dark, fleeting moment. She wished she had been the person Mr. Peterson accused her of being. She wished she had just taken the money. At least then she would be $5,000 richer instead of jobless, shamed, and utterly hopelessly alone. She closed the laptop, leaned her head on the table, and finally allowed herself to cry. Arthur Pendleton did not care about the money. The $5,000 in his wallet was a fraction of what he earned in interest before his first cup of coffee in the morning. What he cared about was the photograph. The faded image of Genevieve, his late wife, was the single most valuable thing he owned. He had carried it every day for 47 years. It was his compass, his connection to a time when his life was simpler and infinitely richer. He didn't realize the wallet was missing until late that afternoon. He reached for it to pay for a book at a small independent bookstore, and his hand met an empty pocket. A mild panic, cold and sharp, pierced his usual calm. He mentally retraced his steps. The park, the bookstore, and before that, the diner, the Golden Spoon. He hadn't been to one of his own diners in years. He'd started Starlight Hospitality Group with a single location, a place much like the Golden Spoon, built with his own hands, and Genevieve's unwavering belief in him. After she passed, he had retreated from the world, burying himself in the sterile, anonymous world of boardrooms and stock portfolios. His empire grew, but he had lost touch with its foundation. This morning, on a whim of nostalgia, he had decided to visit one to see if any of the old magic was left. His driver, a stoic man named Paul, navigated the black sedan back to the diner. It was now 4:00 p.m., the quiet period between the lunch and dinner rushes. As Arthur stepped out of the car, he felt a pang of disappointment. The place looked tired. The sign was missing a letter, so it read the G-Len spoon. It lacked the heart, the warmth that he and Genevieve had poured into their first venture. He pushed open the door, the little bell chiming his arrival. A different waitress was on duty, now a young woman with pink hair, who barely looked up from her phone. At the counter, a man in a slightly too tight manager's uniform was proudly supervising the refilling of sugar dispensers. This must be the man in charge. Arthur approached him. "Excuse me, I was in here earlier this morning around 11 schwas. I believe I may have left my wallet." The manager, Dennis Peterson, straightened up, puffing out his chest. A lost wallet was an opportunity to demonstrate his competence. "A lost wallet, you say? Can you describe it?" "Dark leather, worn. It had a significant amount of cash in it." Arthur said, his voice quiet and steady. Peterson's eyes lit up with recognition and something else, a smug sense of self-importance. "Ah, yes. The wallet, dark leather, found in booth 12. We have it." A wave of relief washed over Arthur. "Thank God. I don't care about the cash, but there's a photograph in there." "Rest assured, sir. Your property is completely secure," Peterson said, cutting him off. He was practically pining. "You were very lucky. In fact, you were the victim of an attempted theft. But I handled the situation personally." Arthur's eyebrows drew together. "An attempted theft? What are you talking about?" "One of my waitresses," Peterson said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "A woman named Jenna Morales. She found your wallet, and instead of turning it in, she concealed it on her person, took it into the break room to rifle through it. No doubt I was monitoring the security cameras and caught her red-handed. I confronted her, retrieved your property, and terminated her on the spot. We run a tight ship here at Starlight Hospitality. Zero tolerance for that kind of behavior." Peterson smiled, expecting praise, perhaps even a reward. But Arthur Pendleton was silent. He was a man who had built a global enterprise on his ability to read people. He could dissect a CEO's lies during a multi-billion-dollar negotiation, and he could spot insincerity from a mile away. And something about this manager's story, his eagerness to paint himself as the hero and the waitress as the villain, felt profoundly wrong. "This waitress, Arthur," said slowly, his eyes narrowing. "You're certain she was trying to steal it?" "Absolutely," Peterson confirmed with a confident nod. "Kept it in her apron for over 20 minutes. A clear violation of policy, a clear sign of intent. It's an open and shut case, but don't you worry, your wallet is safe in the company lockbox. Let me get it for you." He bustled off towards his office. Arthur stood by the counter, a strange disco settling over him. He looked around the diner at the worn vinyl of booth 12, where he had sat just hours before, lost in memories of Genevieve. He imagined a waitress, this Jenna Morales, finding his life's most precious memento. He thought about the kind of desperation that would lead a person to steal, but he also thought about the kind of pride that would lead a manager to ruin someone's life just to score points with corporate. Peterson returned, holding the wallet out like a trophy. "Here you are, sir. Good as new." Arthur took the wallet. He opened it immediately. The cash was there, a thick, untouched brick, but he ignored it. His fingers went straight to the familiar flap of leather. He pulled out the photo of Genevieve. It was there, safe. He stared at her smiling face, and for a moment the world fell away. Then he looked up at Dennis Peterson, whose own smile was beginning to look strained under Arthur's intense, silent scrutiny. "I'd like to see the security footage," Arthur said, his voice soft, but laced with an authority that Peterson had never before encountered. Peterson blinked. "The footage? But why? As I said, I handled it. The perpetrator has been dealt with." "I'm sure you did," Arthur replied, his eyes cold as steel. "Show me the footage." Now, a nervous sweat began to beat on Dennis Peterson's upper lip. This wasn't how he had envisioned this encounter. He had expected a grateful handshake, maybe a hefty tip from the wallet's owner as a thank you. He had not expected this quiet, intense old man to demand evidence. "Sir, I can assure you it's not necessary," Peterson stammered, wringing his hands. "It's just standard procedure and the employee in question. I am not interested in your assurances." Arthur cut in his voice, dangerously calm. "I am interested in the truth. I want to see exactly what happened. My wallet, your employee, your office, the monitor. Let's go." There was no arguing with the tone in the man's voice. It was not a request. It was a command. Defeated, Peterson led the way to his cramped office. He felt a growing sense of unease. Who was this man to be so insistent, so authoritative? Inside the office, Peterson fumbled with the mouse, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled up the security archives. "Here it is," he said, pointing to the screen. "You'll see. It's exactly as I described." The footage began to play. Arthur Pendleton stood behind him, his presence filling the small room, his eyes locked on the grainy black and white images. They watched in silence as the on-screen version of Jenna Morales cleared booth 12. They saw her discover the wallet, the slight hesitation, and then the moment she slipped it into her apron. "See," Peterson said a little too quickly. "Concealment, right there." Arthur said nothing, his gaze unwavering. They watched the next 22 minutes unfold. They saw Jenna serve 3 different tables. At one, she knelt down to speak to a small child who had dropped a crayon, smiling as she handed it back. At another, she patiently explained the daily specials to an elderly couple. She moved with an economy of motion that spoke of exhaustion, but her interactions were gentle, professional. She did not look like a thief casing the joint. She looked like a tired woman doing her job. Then they watched her slip into the break room, disappearing from the camera's view for a minute and a half. "This is when she was counting the cash," Peterson narrated, trying to steer the narrative. "The only blind spot in the diner." Convenient, isn't it? When the on-screen Jenner emerged from the break room, Arthur leaned closer to the monitor. He saw it clearly, the set of her jaw, the determined look in her eyes. It was not the expression of someone who had just decided to commit a crime. It was the expression of someone who had made a difficult decision and found peace with it. She walked directly towards the manager's office. The footage showed her opening her mouth to speak, and then it showed Peterson, his face a mask of rage, jabbing his finger toward his office, cutting her off before she could say a word. Finally, they watched the pathetic, humiliating scene of her dismissal. Peterson standing self-righteously in the middle of the diner, shouting about zero tolerance, while Jenna, her face a blur of shame, scurried out the door. The footage ended. The office was tense save for the low hum of the computer. "It is not as you described," Arthur said, his voice barely a whisper. Yet it carried the force of a thunderclap in the small room. "Sir, with all due respect, the facts are clear," Peterson began, but his voice faltered under Arthur's gaze. "The facts are that your employee found a lost item," Arthur said, turning to face him fully. "The facts are that you were unavailable, engaged in a lengthy phone call. The facts are that she took less than 2 minutes in private, not to count the money, I suspect, but to examine its contents for identification without an audience. I know this because the first thing a thief would take from that wallet is the photograph of my late wife to make it untraceable. But the photo was the first thing I checked, and it was perfectly in place. The facts are that she then attempted to approach you, and you, in your disgusting display of managerial power, did not give her the chance to speak before you accused, convicted, and sentenced her in front of your entire staff and customer base." Peterson's face had gone pale. I was just following policy." "You were not following policy." Arthur's voice was now a low, menacing growl. "You were indulging your own ego. You saw an opportunity to look like a hero, and you didn't care who you had to crush to do it. You saw a struggling woman, and instead of giving her the benefit of the doubt, you saw her as a convenient villain for your little story. You didn't protect my property. You assaulted the character of an honest person." Peterson began to stammer a string of incoherent excuses about profit margins and corporate directives. Arthur held up a hand, silencing him. "I started this company, Mr. Peterson, with my wife. We had one diner. We knew every employee by name. We believed that the foundation of hospitality wasn't profit margins. It was human decency, a principle you seem to have forgotten. The color drained completely from Peterson's face. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. You started your... My name is Arthur Pendleton, he said quietly. And as of this moment, you no longer work for Starlight Hospitality Group. Your termination is effective immediately. Get your personal belongings and get out of my building. He used Petersonen's own words against him, twisting the knife of humiliation that the manager had so callously wielded against Jenner just a few hours earlier. Petersonen stood frozen, his mouth agape, the world he had so carefully constructed crumbling around him. Arthur turned his back on the disgraced manager. He picked up the phone on the desk and buzzed the front counter. The pink-haired waitress answered. "This is Arthur Pendleton," he said. "I need you to access the employee files. I need the home address for Jenna Morales." Jenna Morales was sitting at her small, wobbly kitchen table, engaged in the quiet ritual of despair. She was sorting bills into two piles, hopelessly late and imminently catastrophic. The eviction notice sat in the center, a paper tombstone for the life she had tried to build. Each rustle of paper was an echo of her failure. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the soft, rhythmic breathing of Noah sleeping in the next room. It was that sound, the sound of her son's peaceful breath, that kept the last embers of her hope from being extinguished completely. Then came the knock. It wasn't the timid, papery tap of her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable. It wasn't the aggressive, impatient banging of the landlord. This was a firm, measured, three-part knock. Thump, thump, thump. A sound with weight and purpose. It was the sound of authority, and it sent a jolt of pure, ice-cold terror through her veins. Her first thought was the sheriff. They were here to serve the final eviction papers to put her and Noah out on the street. Her mind, already a maelstrom of anxiety, spun into a nightmarish fantasy. She saw them taping the notice to her door, saw the pity and judgment in her neighbor's eyes. What would she do? Where would they go? Would they end up in a shelter? Would someone from social services decide she was an unfit mother and try to take Noah? Her heart hammered against her ribs as she crept towards the door, her socked feet making no sound on the worn linoleum. Her hands trembled as she reached for the peephole, a tiny fisheye lens into a world that had suddenly become hostile. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Standing in the dim, flickering fluorescent light of her building's hallway was the elderly gentleman from booth 12, the man from the diner. The owner of the wallet that had become the catalyst for her life's complete and utter implosion. The terror shifted, becoming sharper, more specific. Peterson must have followed through. He must have filed a police report embellishing his story of her attempted theft. This man, this victim, was here with the police. They were probably waiting just out of sight down the stairs to identify her, to press charges to have her arrested. The image of being led away in handcuffs of Noah, waking up to find his mother gone, flashed behind her eyes. It was a vision so horrific it almost brought her to her knees. Taking a ragged breath, she decided she couldn't hide. She had to face it. She slid the chain lock into place, a flimsy, pathetic piece of metal that was her only shield, and opened the door a few inches. "Can I help you?" she asked. The voice that came out was not her own. It was a thin, reedy whisper stripped of all warmth and life. The man's face, seen up close, was etched with lines of weariness and a deep, profound sadness. He looked not like an accuser, but like someone carrying a heavy burden. "Miss Morales, Jenna Morales," he asked, his voice gentle, devoid of any malice. "My name is Arthur Pendleton. I was at the diner this morning. I believe you found my wallet." Jenna flinched as if he'd struck her. The chain rattled as her hand shook. "I didn't steal anything." She blurted out the words. "A desperate torrent. I swear I didn't. I was going to give it right to the manager, Mr. Peterson, but he was on the phone. I just wanted to look for an ID. I never would have taken anything. Please. You have to believe me. I have a son." Arthur Pendleton held up a hand, not to silence her, but as a placating, peaceful gesture. "I know," he said, and the simple words were so full of sincerity, they momentarily stunned her. "I know you didn't, Jenna. I saw the truth with my own eyes. May I please come in for a moment? I promise you, I am not here to cause you any more trouble. I am here to try and undo some of the trouble that has been done to you." She stared into his eyes, searching for any hint of a lie, any trap. She found none. There was only a quiet, resolute honesty. Against every instinct, screaming at her to slam the door and hide, she slowly, hesitantly slid the chain free. She opened the door and stepped back, allowing him to enter her small, threadbare world. He stepped inside his presence, seeming to take up all the air in the room. He was dressed in a simple but clearly expensive wool coat, and his shoes were polished to a soft gleam. They stood in stark contrast to the cracked linoleum and the faded thrift store armchair. He took in the apartment in a single, sweeping glance. The crayon drawing of a smiling sun taped to the wall. The single pair of Noah's small, worn-out sneakers by the door. The stack of bills on the table. His gaze wasn't one of judgment or pity. It was one of quiet, heartbreaking comprehension. "I have just come from the diner," he began, turning to face her fully. "I asked to see the security footage from this morning. I watched the entire incident unfold." He paused and described what he saw. "I saw you find the wallet. I saw you look towards the manager's office and see him occupied. And then I watched you serve 3 more tables. I saw you kneel down to help a little girl who had dropped her crayon. I saw you patiently assist an elderly man who couldn't read the menu. And then I saw you walk into the break room." Jenner's stomach clenched, but he continued. "Mr. Peterson claimed you were in there counting my money, but I saw the look on your face when you came out. It wasn't the look of a thief. It was the look of someone who had made a decision. A hard one, I imagine. Then I saw you walk directly to him to do the right thing, and he never even gave you the chance to speak." He took a step closer, his eyes locking with hers. "What Mr. Peterson did to you, the accusations, the public humiliation, was a monstrous injustice. It was cruel, it was unwarranted, and it was a complete failure of everything my company is supposed to stand for. And for that, from the bottom of my heart, I am sorry." Jenna stared at him bewildered. "Your company?" A flicker of pained irony crossed Arthur's face. "Starlight Hospitality Group. I started it a lifetime ago, which means that Mr. Peterson was my employee acting in my name. The responsibility is ultimately mine." The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. Jenna stumbled backward and sank onto the arm of her lumpy sofa. The quiet man from the booth, the owner. The entire time she had been serving coffee to the man who owned the building, who owned her job, who owned her entire miserable fate. The world tilted on its axis. "Mr. Peterson has been relieved of his duties," Arthur stated flatly. "But firing him doesn't fix this. It doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't pay your rent." He nodded towards the pile of envelopes on the table. "And it doesn't help your son. You mentioned he was sick." Tears, hot and sudden, welled in Jenna's eyes. She could only nod, the word "ama" caught in the tight knot of her throat. "Jenna," he said, his voice softening, becoming almost paternal. "In this world, integrity is the rarest and most precious commodity. It's worth more than any stock, more than any building. Today you were faced with a temptation that could have solved your problems in an instant. A temptation, I am sure, felt overwhelming. And you chose to do the right thing. You chose to protect a memory for a complete stranger." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a long, crisp business envelope. "This is not charity," he said, holding it out to her. "This is restitution. This is a bonus for integrity under extreme duress. And it is an offer." Her hand trembled so violently she could barely take the envelope from him. She fumbled with the flap, her fingers feeling clumsy and numb. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a cashier's check made out to Jenna Morales. When she saw the amount, her vision swam. $50,000. It was an impossible number, a figure from another universe. She had to read it 3 times to be sure her eyes weren't deceiving her. "That," Arthur said gently, "is to settle your accounts, your rent, your medical debts, all of it. It is to provide a cushion so that you never again have to feel the kind of desperation that forces you to even consider a choice like the one you face today. It is also compensation for the slander against your character and the profound emotional distress you were forced to endure." The second document was a letter on heavy cream-colored paper bearing the Starlight Hospitality Group letterhead. It was a formal job offer. Her eyes scanned the page past the legalese to the title Regional Manager Quality and Training. The proposed salary was a number she had never dreamed she would earn in a year, let alone with full medical, dental, and vision benefits for her and her family, effective immediately. "I have a problem, Jenna," Arthur said, drawing her stunned gaze up from the paper. "My company has grown too big. I've become disconnected from the heart of it. It's filled with men like Dennis Peterson, men who see policies, not people, who see numbers, not names. I need to fix that. To do that, I need someone to be my eyes and ears, someone to travel to the diners, to work with the staff to ensure the core value of this company. Human decency is not just a slogan on a poster. I need someone who understands, someone who has been on the other side of that counter, someone with unimpeachable character." He took his worn leather wallet from his pocket, and from it he carefully removed the faded photograph of his wife. He held it with a tenderness that was heartbreaking to witness. "This is Genevieve," he said softly. "My late wife. We started the first diner together. She always used to say, 'You can judge a person's soul by what they do when they think no one else is looking.' Today, Jenna, I saw your soul, and it reminded me of hers. Honest, strong, kind." He looked from the photo to her, a deep, pleading sincerity in his eyes. "Please," he said, "come work for me. Help me make this company a place that Genevieve would be proud of again." Jenna looked from the check that represented freedom to the letter that represented a future to the kind, sated billionaire who was offering her a lifeline. The crushing weight that had been pressing down on her chest for months, for years, finally began to lift. The tears that had been falling in silent despair now flowed freely, but they were tears of shock, of release, of a gratitude so immense it felt like it could split her heart open. The future, which just an hour ago had been a terrifying dark void, was now a wide open vista of possibility. Noah would have the best doctors. They would have a safe place to live. She would have a purpose. She had been seen in her moment of deepest humiliation. Her true character had been witnessed, and it had saved her. A sob escaped her, followed by a watery, incredulous laugh. She looked at Arthur Pendleton, the ghost of Booth 12, her executioner, and now her savior, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she gave a real, radiant smile. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I accept." Jenna Morales' story is a powerful reminder that the choices we make when no one is watching are what truly define our character. In a moment of intense desperation, faced with a life-changing sum of money, she chose honesty. She chose to honor the memory of a stranger over her own immediate needs. And while she was punished for it by a system that valued rigid rules over human decency, her integrity ultimately shone through, attracting a reward far greater than she could have ever imagined. This isn't just a story about a waitress and a billionaire. It's about the ripple effect of a single honorable act. It teaches us that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in character, and that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness come from the most unexpected places. If this story of justice and integrity moved you, please give this video a thumbs up to help it reach more people. Share it with a friend who needs a reminder that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, always matters. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will restore your faith in humanity. Thank you for listening. Thank you for